This figure shows the three tiers of a native mode installation of reporting services: the data, application, and server tiers. The reporting services data tier, which I have highlighted in the red rectangle, consists of two databases, which are named by default Report Server and Report Server Temp. You can customize these names when you configure reporting services. Now, Report Server is a primary database that permanently stores report definitions and metadata used for the management of the report server. And then Report Server Temp stores session cache information and cached reports in order to improve delivery performance. As with other SQL Server databases, these reporting services databases don't have to be physically on the same server as the report server. So you can take advantage of SQL Server's scale-out capabilities in order to improve performance. The actual data used to produce reports often comes from many different places, including both relational and non-relational data located on servers other than those that contain the reporting services databases. This means that one or more connection strings are often part of the report definition, so that it can connect to and authenticate against the servers containing the data that's going to be used to generate the report. So you can think of the report definition as a template, and then when you combine data with it, you have the complete rendered report that has all the good information that the user needs. And the next part is the application tier. This consists of the tools that you can use to create, view, and manage reports. The report creation tools create report definition language, or RDL files, which is a form of XML that defines the report components. The primary tools that you use to create reports are the Report Designer in SQL Server Data Tools and the Report Builder, which is a standalone non-web-based tool. You can also create your own tools or use third-party tools that make use of the reporting services programmatic interfaces. Another report creation tool, PowerView, is available when you use SharePoint integrated mode for reporting services. In order to view managed reports, you can use a web browser to access the Report Manager. This provides a remarkably capable report viewer, letting you page through large reports, render reports to various formats, such as XML or HTML or whatever, print the report, and change report parameters. In SharePoint integrated mode, you can use various web parts to give users access to reports hosted on a native mode server. And you can use the programmatic interfaces to integrate report views into a custom application or using URL endpoints. Reporting Services also provides a number of tools you can use to manage your report server. One is the Reporting Services Configuration Manager. It has a lot of features for configuring your server. And you certainly want to run Configuration Manager for a fresh instance that you create of reporting services. Another tool is SQL Server Management Studio. That's the primary management interface for reporting services. In order to use it, you'll need to connect to an instance of reporting services, much as you probably now use it to connect to database instances. This gives you a nice GUI interface that lets you manage just about all of the objects on a report server, just as you can use it when connected to a database instance to work with database objects. Another tool is the SQL Server Configuration Manager. This lets you start and stop the Reporting Services Windows service. You can also use any of the Windows Services tools in order to perform those kinds of actions, because Reporting Services, like SQL Server itself, is in fact a Windows service. Then Report Manager lets you organize and configure reports, and you can use the tool to manage report security as well as user subscriptions to reports. And then there are command line utilities for those inclined, which let you perform repetitive tasks without a fancy GUI. You can perform just about any action available through any of the reporting services management tools using command line statements. And then there are programmatic interfaces for performing management functions, so you can create your own tools if you want to do that. This application tier of reporting services provides a rich supply of tools for creating, viewing, and managing reports, as well as the report server. There's a lot of overlap, though, in the various tools, so you'll want to experiment with each of them to find the ones that do what you want, how you want to do it. But if you're like most people, you'll probably find that one or two of the tools are the ones that you'll use most often. All right, then the third tier is the server tier. This is the core of the reporting services architecture, and it contains various processor components and extensions. The processor components receive and respond to requests to the report server, sometimes delegating functions to other components called server extensions. And those perform specific services involved in processing a report. Everything in the report server is managed by two primary processor components: the report processor, you can see in the center there, and the scheduling and delivery processor, which you can see in yellow in the upper left. The report processor responds to all requests that involve report execution and rendering. The actual processing required for a report depends on the type of report requested. If it's an on-demand report, the report processor makes use of a data processing extension to execute data queries and then merges the result into a temporary format according to the defined layout, but which is not yet a finished report. And then reporting services stores a cached report in the report server temp database, again that's its default name, in a temporary format for later use. A report snapshot is stored in the report server database in that temporary format. All right, so once the report processor generates the report in the temporary format or retrieves a stored version of it, it calls a rendering extension to generate the final visual report for the user. The second primary processor component is the scheduling and delivery processor. This component responds to all requests for scheduled events, things like snapshots and subscriptions. Scheduling is performed through SQL agent jobs that are created when the user creates a snapshot or a subscription request. When SQL agent generates a report request through a scheduled item, the scheduling and delivery processor forwards the request to the report processor to generate the report, which is then sent to the scheduling and delivery processor to deliver the report as requested by the user. All right, reporting services includes a number of extensibility hooks that can hook into that overall process. And this is the way that Microsoft implemented a number of reporting features. But you can use those same hooks for your own custom extensions. For example, you might create a custom data processing extension to provide data from a legacy data feed. You can also create custom security, rendering, and delivery extensions. In fact, if you don't like how a built-in reporting services feature works, you can disable a standard server extension and add your own extension, which can be something you build or obtain from a third party. So you have lots of flexibility in how you modify how reporting services generates reports. Now, reporting services comes with a number of built-in types of server extensions, and you can see a lot of these in the figure. They're mostly in white on the right, as well as one down to the left, delivery extensions. A report server requires at least one authentication extension, one data processing extension, and one rendering extension. And then the delivery and custom report processing extensions are optional, but you need them if you want to support report distribution or custom controls. Okay, so the first one I want to talk about is the authentication extensions. By default, reporting services uses an authentication extension that provides Windows authentication, which includes impersonation and delegation features. Unlike some other server extensions, you can have only one active authentication extension in a report server instance. So you have to decide what kind of authentication you want to support. If you have a custom authentication extension, which you can do, you have to remove the default authentication extension. All right, then the second type of extension is the data processing extensions, down there in the lower right of the figure. A default instance of a report server includes various data processing extensions used to access data in various stores, including SQL Server databases, of course, analysis services, and Oracle, as well as OLEDB and ODBC data sources, as well as others. The report processor uses one or more of these extensions to execute data queries to retrieve the data used in a report. And then there are delivery extensions. That's in the yellow to the lower left. By default, Report Server instance includes delivery extensions for email and file sharing that lets it deliver reports to users. If you're using SharePoint integration, another extension supports saving reports to a SharePoint library. When you use the email extension, you can embed the report in the email, include it as an attached file, or provide a URL link to the report on the report server. Next type of extension is the rendering extensions. This is one of the strengths of reporting services because it can create reports for users in various formats: HTML, Excel, comma-separated value text files, XML, images, Word, SharePoint list, and PDF. So the extension takes a report in the temporary format that I talked about and converts it into a finished report in the desired format. And then finally, there are report processing extensions. This is an optional component that can process custom report items, your own or from third parties. You can think of these as custom controls for a report that merges data into the format required by those report items. Okay, so that's all the extensions, the categories of extensions. So these server extensions aren't quite the plug-and-play provider model of some Microsoft development technologies, but you do have a lot of flexibility in how reporting services performs some tasks, either by developing your own extensions or replacing the standard extensions or adding custom features to the report server. Now, Reporting Services Report Server is a collection of several applications that execute as a single Windows service under a single Windows account that provides the features of the server tier. And you can see these components within this figure. Each of the distinct feature areas execute in separate, well-defined application domains that host the report manager, a report server web service, and background processing. Each of these three areas are enabled by default, but you can configure each separately and turn them off if you aren't using them. Now, Microsoft categorizes the reporting services architecture into four categories: service and architecture, report manager, the report server web service, and background processing. So let's talk about the service and infrastructure. The service and infrastructure components provide services to the other component categories to support report generation and management. This support infrastructure consists of several broad components. First is memory management. This provides services to extend the base SQL Server memory management features for the report server. The component's responsible for providing memory to the report server and monitoring thread processing and health. You can configure memory thresholds for the reporting services as a whole, and the report server handles memory recycling internally. And you can configure various settings that control the duration of persistent connections. Remote Procedure Calls, or RPC, supports execution of procedures on a remote server. RPC is used by the Reporting Services Windows Management Instrumentation Provider, WMI, which is an extension of the WMI feature in modern versions of Windows. Then Application Domain Management is a replacement for Internet Information Services. Earlier versions of reporting services were built using IIS, but IIS is no longer required to provide the HTTP-based features of reports. It's all built into reporting services. Then there's an HTTP listener component, which uses http.sys in Windows directly to listen to HTTP requests for the report server. By registering and configuring the protocol, path, port, and virtual directory, much as you would for a website on a server, http.sys identifies incoming reporting services requests and forwards them to the authentication layer to verify user identity, which then passes on the request to the web service. You can have IIS installed in Windows on the same server, and the HTTP listener will forward reporting services requests correctly. And then the last component within services and infrastructure is authentication. Authentication identifies the identity of the user making the request to the report server. The authentication layer supports Windows Integrated Security, NTLM authentication, basic authentication, forms or custom authentication, and anonymous access. It uses Windows Integrated Security and NTLM authentication by default, but you can configure it to use the other authentication types. You can use only one type of authentication for each report server instance. All right, the next component in the service architecture is the report manager. This is the web-based front-end client that provides access to the report server web service. You can use it to view reports and manage the report server. By default, the report manager provides access to the web service running in the same instance of the report server, but you can point it to a web service in another instance on the same machine or on a different server. It's a web browser-based interface that requires no client-side installation. You do have to configure Report Manager before it's available for use, and you do that with the Configuration Manager. If you don't configure the URL to provide access, you essentially disable Report Manager for that report server instance. All right, the next component is the Report Server Web Service. This serves as the report processing engine for on-demand report requests. It also handles authentication requests and authorizes user report requests, as well as provides programmatic access for a custom application if you choose not to use Report Manager. In fact, Report Manager uses this web service behind the scenes. And then the final component is background processing. This component handles a variety of tasks initiated by the report server that execute in the background, which includes most scheduling, subscription, and report delivery tasks, as well as a variety of report server database maintenance tasks. It also handles various report processing tasks that aren't explicitly handled by the report server web service. One issue with background processing is that because the tasks execute on a schedule, they don't run with the execution context of a user. As a result, when a background task executes, reporting services checks to make sure that the user who created the task still exists and has the necessary permissions to execute the task. All other background report processing tasks execute under the identity of the Windows account for unattended execution. Background processing also uses a separate memory management process that has a lower priority than on-demand report activities, thus making these true background processes.